We live in an era defined by, well, a rather staggering paradox, I think. I mean, I want you to just picture the James Webb Space Telescope for a second.
Oh, brilliant piece of engineering, that.
Wow. It is literally sitting out there in the freezing vacuum of space, orbiting, a million miles away from Earth at a Lagrange point. And we've engineered these gold-plated beryllium mirrors capable of capturing infrared light from the very dawn of time.
Which is just mad when you actually think about it.
It is. We are literally photographing the edge of the observable universe, mapping the cosmic web, looking at galaxies that formed billions of years ago. It's a level of precision and, well, technological mastery that's almost difficult to comprehend. I mean, we can sequence the human genome, we can split the atom.
We're masters of the external world, essentially.
Exactly. We have built a civilization that has utterly mastered the exterior. And yet, if you ask the average person today to sit alone in a silent room, no screens, no background noise, no music, just their own thoughts for 10 minutes, they will find it absolutely agonizing.
Yeah, and there is actual empirical data on this, actually. Psychological studies have shown that a significant portion of people would rather administer a mild electric shock to themselves than sit in quiet contemplation for 15 minutes.
Wait, really? A literal shock?
A literal electric shock. The internal landscape has become a terrifying place for us. We've developed this profound contradiction where humanity is holding the keys to the cosmos, but we are fumbling in the dark when it comes to navigating our own minds.
It's just maximum technological power coupled with this, profound, lingering spiritual emptiness.
Spot on.
And that deep sense of being completely unmoored, despite having all these miracles of modern science in our pockets. That brings us to the core of what we're unpacking today.
We've got a really fascinating collision of source materials for this deep dive. On one side, we have an extensive collection of ancient yet highly progressive philosophical texts.
Right, detailing the ancient science of Tantra and its modern socioeconomic counterpart known as Prout, progressive utilization theory. Prout, progressive utilization theory.
Yes.
And these texts, they present a systematic, almost mechanical approach to human spirituality and potential.
And then we are placing those texts right up against a highly critical, modern evolutionary perspective. We're looking at a lecture that explores the biological and psychological origins of organized religion, treating it not as a source of divine truth, but essentially as a survival mechanism. An evolutionary trap, really.
Right, a parasitic meme that hijacks the human brain.
Exactly. It is a massive intellectual collision.
It really is. Because for a long time, we've been handed this artificial binary, Like, you are either a rational person of science who deals in facts, or you are a mystic who operates entirely on blind faith. Our mission in this deep dive is to completely shatter that binary.
Yes, to contrast the empowering scientific approach to inward expansion found in the texts on Tantra and Prout, progressive utilization theory, with that stark, frankly chilling warning about organized religion presented in the evolutionary video.
Our goal is to look at the architecture of human belief, right? We want to understand how we can maintain intense intellectual rigor while also exploring the absolute depths of human consciousness.
Without falling into the traps of dogma.
Precisely. Now, before we go any further, I do need to state something very clearly to you listening. The materials we are exploring today touch upon some intensely debated, highly charged concepts.
Absolutely. Heavy critiques of major worldviews.
Right. Established religions, modern socioeconomic systems. So in this deep dive, we are functioning purely as impartial explorers. We are not taking sides. We are not endorsing any specific political philosophy or religious doctrine. Our purpose is unapologetic intellectual exploration. We're just here to dismantle the mechanics of these philosophies, lay them out on the table, and see how they function.
We're just looking at the blueprints of human thought.
Yeah.
Nothing more, nothing less.
Exactly. So let's start with the video's perspective, because it introduces a concept that genuinely alters how you view human behavior. It breaks down the anatomy of a mind virus. The speaker introduces the concept of memes. And we should clarify, we aren't talking about internet jokes here.
No, we are talking about the original biological definition coined by Richard Dawkins back in the 1970s.
Right.
Dawkins proposed that just as biological evolution is driven by genes, replicators operating in the medium of chemistry, cultural evolution is driven by memes.
Memes being ideas.
Exactly. Memes are replicators operating in the medium of human culture and human brains. An idea, a catchphrase, a melody, a belief system. And just like a gene, a meme's only goal is to replicate. It competes for space and energy in human minds. And the video takes this concept and draws a very deliberate, really chilling analogy to biological parasites.
The biological examples they use are literally the stuff of nightmares. I mean, the lancet fluke is the one that really stuck with me.
Oh, the lancet fluke. Dicrocelium dendriticum. It is a masterclass in behavioral hijacking. It's this tiny parasitic flatworm with a highly complex life cycle. To reproduce, it ultimately needs to end up in the liver of a grazing mammal, like a cow or a sheep.
Right.
But it begins its journey inside a snail. The snail excretes the fluke larvae in the slime ball. An ant comes along and eats the slime ball. And now the fluke is inside the ant.
And this is where the biological hijacking actually occurs.
Right. The fluke navigates through the ant's body and physically attaches itself to the ant's subesophageal ganglion.
Which is the brain part that controls movement.
Right, exactly. A cluster of nerve cells controlling movement. So when the temperature drops in the evening, the fluke overrides the ant's natural instincts. Instead of returning to the colony, the ant is forced to climb up a blade of grass. It climbs to the very tip and just locks its mandibles onto the grass.
Wow.
Now, if the sun comes up and it gets too hot, the fluke actually releases control so the ant can climb down and survive the heat. But the next evening, it forces the ant right back up the grass.
So if you observed this ant without knowing about the parasite, you might assign all sorts of noble intentions to it, right? You might think, oh, the ant is showing incredible perseverance.
Yeah.
Or perhaps it's seeking a better vantage point for the colony.
But the truth is, the ant derives zero benefit from this behavior. It is actively suicidal.
It's just a vehicle.
Yes. The parasite is inducing a behavior that absolutely guarantees its own survival, getting eaten by a passing cow at the complete expense of the host. The ant's brain is no longer serving the ant.
The video also points to Toxoplasma gondii, which operates on a very similar principle, but in mammals.
Yeah, Toxoplasma gondii needs to reproduce inside the gut of a feline. So when a mouse ingests the parasite, it travels to the mouse's brain, specifically targeting the amygdala.
The fear center.
The fear center, exactly. It fundamentally alters the mouse's neurochemistry. The mouse loses its evolutionary terror of the smell of cat urine. Instead of hiding, it becomes bold. It runs out into the open. It essentially offers itself up as fearless prey. The parasite transforms the host into bait to ensure its own replication.
And the video takes these, biological horrors and applies their underlying logic to organized religion. The argument presented is that certain dogmatic religious ideas function as cultural parasites. They hijack human brains, they demand the complete surrender of the host's self-interest, and they induce behaviors that ensure the meme's survival completely regardless of the cost to the human.
It is a devastating critique of dogma. I mean, the video points out that many traditional religious frameworks explicitly demand the surrender of critical judgment.
Right.
They elevate obedience and absolute faith above self-preservation and logic.
Right.
From an evolutionary biology standpoint, a belief system that teaches you that questioning the system is a moral failing and that spreading the system to your children is your highest duty, well, it's built an impenetrable fortress around itself.
It creates the ultimate survival mechanism for an idea. If the meme dictates, do not question me or you will suffer eternally, and spread me to others or they will suffer eternally, the meme ensures its own replication across generations. People will sacrifice their wealth, their autonomy, and sometimes their very lives, much like the ant on the blade of grass, to serve the meme.
Yeah. The behavior looks like profound devotion from the outside, but the evolutionary lens suggests it is a highly evolved form of cultural hijacking.
Okay, but I want to challenge this framework using the other side of our source material. Because when you dive into the texts on Prout, progressive utilization theory, and the ancient science of Tantra, they detail practices that involve chanting, meditation, and focused devotion. So if religion is a parasitic mind virus that thrives on making people blindly repeat ideas, how is chanting a spiritual mantra any different? Doesn't that just look like an older, perhaps more sophisticated strain of the exact same virus?
That is the pivotal question, absolutely. And the texts offer a robust, highly analytical response to it. But it requires us to look at the foundational mechanics of the practice itself. We have to start with the etymology of the word Tantra. This framework was propounded thousands of years ago, long before the modern concept of organized institutional religion really took shape. And the linguistic breakdown of the word changes everything, right?
Completely. In Sanskrit, the root word tan means to expand, and the suffix tra means to liberate. Therefore, Tantra translates literally to liberation through expansion.
Liberation through expansion.
Exactly. This represents the exact opposite psychological movement of the viral contraction described in the video.
Let's visualize that concept of contraction versus expansion for a moment. When a person is gripped by fear, stress, or absolute dogma, the physical and psychological response is contraction.
Your body physically tenses. Your breathing becomes shallow, confined entirely to the upper chest. Your shoulders hunch. You are biologically preparing to defend yourself. And your psychological landscape shrinks just as violently. You get tunnel vision. You are no longer capable of pondering vast abstract concepts or, feeling empathy for a wide group of people. You become obsessed with a hyper-specific perceived threat. You contract into a tiny defensive point of ego.
And the parasitic meme thrives in that state of contraction. It relies on keeping the host fearful, small, and reactive. The science of Tantra, however, is described as the vigorous, deliberate effort to breathe so much vitality and psychological expansiveness into the mind that the tiny, restrictive bonds of fear and petty ego naturally snap. It is not an exercise in blind repetition. It is an active, forceful expansion of consciousness.
The texts delve into how this is achieved, and they bring up the science of acoustic roots. It reads a bit like quantum physics layered over ancient linguistics.
It is a sophisticated vibrational science, really. The underlying premise is that the universe is not composed of dead matter. It is entirely composed of vibrations operating at different frequencies. Every cognitive state and physical manifestation has a corresponding acoustic root. The texts explain that the Sanskrit syllable ta is the acoustic root of staticity. It represents dullness, inertia, and extreme lethargy.
It's the sound of cognitive wet cement. It is that feeling of being completely unmotivated, paralyzed by apathy, or locked into a dogmatic loop where no new information can penetrate.
Exactly. When you are in that state, you are dominated by that static force. The Trey aspect is the active liberation from that dullness. It is the conscious, vigorous shaking off of inertia.
Returning to my initial pushback, though, the texts advocate for the use of an Ishta mantra, which is a specific focal word or phrase that a practitioner repeats. How does sitting and repeating a single word not eventually turn you into the ant blindly clinging to the grass?
Well, the texts provide a psychological analogy from the ancient epic, the Ramayana, to answer exactly that. It centers on the character Hanuman. In the story, scholars approach Hanuman and pose a philosophical challenge. They say, "You are a deeply wise being. You understand that fundamentally there is absolutely no difference between the supreme cosmic entity called Narayana and the supreme entity called Rama. Philosophically, they are both merely abstract names pointing to the exact same formless, infinite consciousness. So why do you insist on only chanting the name of Rama?"
Which seems like a fair question. I mean, if the universe is infinite and formless, why fixate on one specific localized name? It feels like falling back into dogma.
But Hanuman's response is a masterclass in understanding human psychology. He acknowledges the philosophical truth. He says, essentially, I am fully aware that there is no fundamental difference. However, to achieve my ultimate psychological and spiritual goal, my mind must be perfectly pinnacled. I cannot afford to leave my mental energy scattered across vast, abstract philosophical concepts. And then the text provides the exact derivation of the name Rama. It translates to the entity whose pressure kills Ravana.
Ravana being the demon king with 10 heads.
Right. But those 10 heads are not merely a mythical monster. They represent a highly precise psychological metaphor. The 10-headed demon is the depraved, constantly distracted human mind that moves uncontrollably in 10 different directions simultaneously, driven by the 10 sensory and motor organs. Your eyes are scanning a screen, your ears are half listening to a conversation, your memory is agonizing over a mistake made yesterday, and your anxiety is projecting worst-case scenarios into tomorrow.
That is an agonizingly accurate diagnosis of the modern human condition. We are constantly fighting a 10-headed demon of distraction.
Yes. And when your cognitive energy is fragmented across 10 different vectors like that, you possess absolutely zero internal power. You lack the concentration required to achieve profound realization or effect meaningful change in your life. So the use of the Ishta mantra, the intentional, rigorous repetition, is not the surrender of your intellect to a mind virus. It's a surgical tool.
A tool to gather up all that scattered energy.
Exactly. It's utilized to gather up all that scattered, outward-running energy and forge it into what the text calls a pinnacled intellect. It is the intentional unification of the mind to achieve a conscious, expansive goal.
The contrast is incredibly sharp then. The mind virus described in the video requires you to surrender your critical thinking so the virus can survive and replicate. The spiritual science described in the text demands that you intensely focus your critical thinking so that you can expand and liberate yourself. One uses you as a vehicle, the other empowers you as the driver.
Brilliant way to put it. And that leads us directly to examine how these differing internal states, the contraction of fear versus the expansion of liberation, manifest in the external world. How do they shape the institutions we build and the societies we live in?
Which brings us to the concept of institutional control. We have to look at the surrogate police force versus the universal Dharma. The video lays out a really compelling evolutionary timeline detailing how organized religion initially formed. It begins with raw, primitive survival instincts.
Right. Cognitive science refers to this instinct as the hyperactive agent detection device, or HADD. It is an evolutionary mechanism we share with many other mammals. Imagine our early ancestors foraging on the savanna. They hear a sudden rustling in the tall grass nearby. The ancestors who assumed the noise was merely the wind well, occasionally that rustling was a lion, and those individuals did not survive to pass on their genetic material.
It's the classic distinction between a type I and type 2 error in statistics, a false positive versus a false negative.
Exactly. The ancestors whose brains were hyperactive, who immediately generated a false positive and assumed there's an agent in that grass, there's an intention behind that noise, were the ones who survived. From an evolutionary standpoint, it was infinitely safer to mistake the wind for a predator than to mistake a predator for the wind.
So our brains evolved this hair trigger mechanism to project minds and intentions onto natural phenomena. A thunderstorm isn't just atmospheric pressure changes. It is an angry sky god throwing lightning. A prolonged drought isn't a climate pattern. It is a direct punishment for human behavior.
And the video argues that this instinct generated thousands of localized wild folk religions, beliefs in river spirits, forest imps, local deities. However, over centuries, just as humans learned to domesticate wild wolves into obedient dogs and wild aurochs into docile dairy cows, human institutions learned to domesticate these wild religious impulses. Priests, rulers, and stewards refined and codified these ideas to serve highly specific social and political functions.
The most cynical and brilliant function of this domestication is the creation of a surrogate police force. The video uses an analogy that perfectly encapsulates modern surveillance: the $5 radar sign.
Oh, it is a brilliantly illustrative concept. The speaker in the video describes a small municipality that wanted to slow down traffic, but lacked the budget for police patrols. They put up a sign that read, "Your speed is controlled by radar." But there was no radar equipment. There was no camera. It was simply a piece of plywood and some reflective paint that cost $5. Yet it worked. Traffic slowed down. Why? Because the drivers believed they were being monitored.
You don't need to hire an actual police officer. You don't need a patrol car. You just need to successfully install the concept of surveillance inside the driver's own head. The driver will then police themselves. It is the ultimate panopticon.
And the video argues that organized dogmatic religion operates on the exact same psychological architecture. By domesticating the primitive instinct of agency and shaping it into the concept of an all-seeing, all-knowing deity, the idea that the eyes of the Lord are in every place, or that every secret thought is laid bare before a creator, institutions manufactured an incredibly efficient, cost-free surrogate police force.
I mean, if a population truly believes that their most private thoughts, their hidden desires, and their secret actions are constantly being monitored and judged by an invisible, omnipotent authority, they will rigorously monitor themselves. They will confess their transgressions, they will obey the established rules, they will pay their tithes, and they will conform. The institution insulates itself from doubt and rebellion, not by deploying external military force, but by instilling a deep internal fear and guilt.
It is a devastatingly effective method of population control. But here is where the texts on Prout, progressive utilization theory, and tantric science introduce a vital distinction. They do not defend organized religion against this critique. In fact, the texts completely agree that religion operates as a tool of division and fear.
Yeah, the texts offer an absolutely scathing critique of religious dogma. They draw a sharp, uncompromising line between the concept of madhhab, which translates to religion, and the concept of dharma. In the West, we frequently use these terms interchangeably, which the texts view as a fatal error in understanding.
The text defines madhab, or religion, as a rigid collection of external, physical, and ritualistic observances. It relies entirely on psycho-sentimental boundaries. It operates on the belief that if you perform a specific physical action, if you kneel in a particular posture, if you fast on a designated calendar day, if you wear a specific type of garment, or if you pray facing a certain geographical direction, you are saved, and anyone who does not perform these actions is condemned.
The text highlights the sheer absurdity and the vicious division this fixation on the physical creates. There is a section that critiques the fanaticism bred by these rituals using pure, unadulterated logic. It notes that in certain traditions, cows are considered highly sacred primarily because they provide milk, which sustains life. But the text asks a pointed question. If the provision of milk is the criteria for physical sanctity, then what about buffaloes, which generally provide even more milk? Shouldn't buffaloes logically be considered even more sacred?
Exactly. The example exposes how irrational religious dogma becomes when it fixates on physical objects rather than universal principles. The text also brings up the phenomenon of a solar eclipse. Ancient mythologies taught that celestial events were caused by demons Rahu and Ketu attempting to swallow the sun. To appease these demons and protect the sun, people would rush to perform ritual baths in holy rivers. And the text points out the tragic irony that even today, in an era where people understand the absolute science of orbital mechanics and know exactly what an eclipse is, millions will still rush to perform these ritual baths. They are driven by the lingering fear psychosis instilled by their religion.
The scientific knowledge is present, but the fear is stronger. The $5 radar sign is still working perfectly in their minds.
Religion, according to this definition, breeds inertia. It relies on the acoustic root ta. It commands the individual not to think, but merely to obey. Dharma, however, is defined in an entirely different manner. Dharma is not a set of externally imposed rules. It is an innate, psycho-spiritual faculty inherent in every single human being. Etymologically, it means characteristic or property.
Much like the dharma of fire is its fundamental property to burn and provide heat, and the dharma of water is its property to flow and provide moisture.
Precisely. And the dharma of a human being is the innate drive to seek expansion, to seek the infinite, and to bring out latent divine qualities. Dharma is one and indivisible for the entire human race. It does not concern itself with the superficial differences of what clothes you wear, what language you speak, or what rituals you perform. It seeks to unite humanity through universal cosmic sentiments. It actively rejects the dogmatic, fearful control mechanisms of institutions.
So religion relies on external boundaries to divide and control. Dharma relies on internal, universal truths to unite and expand. This forces us to examine the role of personal autonomy. If an institution is trying to control you, what happens to your free will? Are we meant to be sheep, or are we meant to be something else entirely?
Well, the video makes a highly compelling case that religious institutions require humans to act exactly like domesticated sheep. The speaker references scriptural demands, such as the command to lean not on your own understanding.
The argument is that human beings often find the complexities, the ambiguities, and the anxieties of existence to be overwhelming. To cope with this, they essentially outsource their moral and intellectual decision-making to the institution.
It is an abdication of personal autonomy in exchange for psychological comfort. You trade your intellectual freedom and your critical thinking for the security of having a shepherd tell you exactly how the universe works and what your place in it is. You no longer have to navigate the terrifying gray areas of life. The institution provides a prepackaged, black and white set of rules enforced by the invisible surrogate police force. You accept your role as a sheep in the flock. But the texts on Tantra completely flip this concept on its head. They approach autonomy through a profound philosophical framework, distinguishing between aparavidya and puravidya. This distinction is the bedrock of the scientific approach to spirituality. Aparavidya translates to material science or relative knowledge. It is the realm of the how and the what. It encompasses chemistry, physics, biology, economics, and sociology.
It is the science that engineered the James Webb Space Telescope and mapped the human genome.
Yes. In the realm of material science, the relationship dynamic is very clear. The human being is the subject. You are the observer looking through the microscope lens. The entire physical universe, the cells, the stars, the economy is the object. You study it, you categorize it, and you manipulate it.
We are the masters of the laboratory.
However, Paravidya is spiritual science. It deals with the ultimate why. And in spiritual science, this relationship dynamic is entirely inverted. The text states that the supreme consciousness, the infinite entity, is the ultimate subject. We, our physical bodies, our thoughts, our civilizations, our entire universe, are the objects. We are the ones being observed.
And this is where I have to push back strongly, because when you first hear that concept, the immediate reaction is alarm. If I am merely an object that is constantly being watched by a supreme subject, how does that not sound exactly like the terrifying invisible surveillance state the video just warned us about? Isn't this supreme subject just the ultimate $5 radar sign in the sky?
It is a vital and completely natural question, especially given how fiercely we guard our individuality and privacy in the modern world. But the texts address this anxiety by rigorously examining the nature of the gaze. The surveillance of a surrogate police force, the radar sign, is a clinical, judgmental gaze. It operates on suspicion. It is waiting for you to make an error so it can punish you. This breeds what the texts call fearful love.
Fearful love is essentially the fear of hell, the fear of bad karma, the anxiety of performing a ritual incorrectly. It is compliance driven by terror.
Exactly. But the gaze of the supreme subject in Paravidya is described as the gaze of absolute, unconditional love. Consider how it feels to be deeply seen by someone who truly loves you, a devoted partner, a loving parent. When they look at you, you do not feel policed. You do not feel surveilled. You feel known. You feel held. You feel entirely safe to be your authentic self without fear of retribution.
You don't feel like a sheep being herded. You feel empowered.
When an individual realizes they are the object of an infinite, unconditionally loving subject, the fearful love naturally transforms into fearless love. You are no longer operating out of the anxiety of a domesticated animal trying to avoid punishment. You are operating from a foundation of profound internal security. This leads to the ultimate expression of autonomy found in the Tantric tradition.
The concept of sadhana, or rigorous spiritual practice, and the texts detail a specific practice that is absolutely visceral in its intensity, the meditation and the burial ground.
Oh, it is the ultimate, uncompromising confrontation with human fear. The texts describe a traditional tantric practice known as kapalika sadhana, where a practitioner goes to a cremation ground or burial ground in the dead of night to meditate.
If you try to vividly picture that scenario, you are sitting in pitch blackness. There are shadows everywhere. The absolute silence is occasionally broken by the rustling of a branch or the settling of earth. The text uses the word horripilation, the physical reality of goosebumps covering your flesh, the hairs on your arms standing up, the HADD, that evolutionary hyperactive agent detection device we discussed, would be screaming at you. It would be flooding your system with adrenaline yelling, "Run! There are predators, there are ghosts."
And that is precisely the objective of the practice. The practitioner is not sitting in the charnel ground to appease a deity or perform a mindless ritual. They are deliberately placing themselves in that environment to confront the absolute root of all human terror. The fear of death, the fear of the unknown, the fear of the dissolution of the ego. They sit amidst the physical remnants of death and the evolutionary terror of their own biology, and they force their mind to remain focused on the supreme subject. They are waging a rigorous internal battle for ultimate autonomy. They are actively refusing to be controlled by their evolutionary instincts or societal conditioning.
They are not retreating from reality. They are facing the darkest aspects of it head-on.
Through sheer, courageous repetition and focus, the fear eventually burns away. The shadows revert to being just shadows. The bones are recognized as just bones. The practitioner achieves a state of true, fearless autonomy. They are no longer a slave to their own amygdala.
But the text is also incredibly pragmatic. It acknowledges that not everyone can or should go meditate in a midnight burial ground or retreat to a cave in the Himalayas. To explain how this fearless autonomy operates in the context of modern daily life, it uses an analogy that is perhaps the most profound concept in the entire deep dive: the lily in the mud.
It is a beautiful and philosophically vital metaphor. The text explicitly condemns what it terms the doctrine of illusion, or Mayavada. This is the philosophical stance that the physical world, with all its suffering and inequality, is merely an illusion or a dream, and therefore the highest spiritual goal is to ignore the world and escape into one's own mind. The text labels this an inherently defective philosophy.
Because it breeds apathy. If the world is just an illusion, why bother helping the poor? Why fight systemic injustice? Why build hospitals or schools? If it's all fake, you have no moral obligation to the world.
Exactly. It is a philosophy of escapism that serves the privileged. Instead, the text offers the analogy of the lily. A lily flower is pristine, beautiful, and naturally orients itself upward toward the light, toward the moon. But where does the lily grow?
It grows in the swamp. It is rooted deep in the muck, the mud, surrounded by biting insects and harsh winds.
The mud represents real life. The mud is your daily job, paying your mortgage, sitting in traffic jams, navigating systemic inequality, and facing the daily grinding reality of survival. True spiritual autonomy, according to this framework, does not mean pretending the mud does not exist. It means remaining firmly rooted in the gritty, physical reality of the world, keeping your mind expansive and focused on the infinite, and crucially, fighting the injustice found in the mud with the strength of your muscles.
The strength of your muscles. It demands vigorous, fearless physical engagement with the world. You maintain the expansive mindset of a spiritual being, but you are actively throwing elbows in the mud to make the pond a better place for everyone else.
Which serves as the perfect transition to examine the socioeconomic macro level. We have to ask, what happens to a civilization if we entirely ignore this need for inner expansiveness? What happens if we design a society based purely on aparavidya, on material science and economic metrics alone?
What happens when we pretend that the mud is the only reality and that there is no moon to look up to?
The texts offer a highly analytical critique of this scenario, which forms the foundational socioeconomic principles of Prout, progressive utilization theory. Prout begins with the fundamental, undeniable observation about human nature. Human beings are mind-preponderant entities.
Meaning our primary driver is cognitive and subtle, not merely biological.
Correct. An animal is generally satisfied once its physical needs are met. If a lion has food, shelter, and the opportunity to reproduce, it rests. It does not suffer existential dread. But human beings possess a subtle cognitive capacity and an innate, infinite psychic thirst. We possess a constant drive for more. And the profound, catastrophic error of extreme materialism is attempting to satisfy an infinite psychic hunger with finite material objects.
It is an equation that will never balance. You cannot fill an infinite void with luxury cars, career promotions, or an endless stream of digital entertainment. The math just doesn't work.
When an entire socioeconomic system is constructed on the premise that physical matter and economic output are the only realities, it inevitably leads to societal collapse. The text utilizes this framework to critique extreme materialism, including the philosophical underpinnings of Marxism, which is used as reductionist, treating human consciousness as merely a byproduct of earth and stone.
The text explores this critique through an analogy that is chillingly accurate for modern life. It asks us to consider the zoo enclosure.
Yes. The author asks the reader to imagine constructing the perfect, utopian zoo enclosure for human beings. You design it so that every conceivable material need is met flawlessly. The inhabitants are provided with free, highly nutritious food. They have access to state-of-the-art healthcare. They are completely secure from external threats. They have comfortable beds and climate control.
So from a purely materialistic, statistical standpoint, you have achieved utopia. All the metrics for well-being are maximized. The humans inside the enclosure should be perfectly, permanently happy.
But the text asks, what will inevitably happen? Because human beings are mind preponderant, because they possess that latent infinite thirst, they will eventually look up from the food trough. They will realize that their environment, no matter how comfortable, have boundaries. They will walk to the edge of the enclosure, touch the fence, and they will rebel.
Because the human spirit demands intellectual and spiritual freedom. Without that capacity for infinite expansion, the most comfortable, well-fed enclosure in the world is still recognized as a cage. And if we extrapolate this to our modern society, just look at the massive corporate tech campuses in Silicon Valley.
They are the exact modern manifestation of the perfect zoo enclosure.
You work at one of these companies, and you receive free gourmet meals cooked by private chefs. You have on-site dry cleaning, nap pods, ping pong tables, comprehensive health insurance, and free kombucha on tap. Every physical and material friction has been smoothed away. But what is the reality? The employees still suffer from massive burnout. They experience profound existential crises. They feel empty because the institution is attempting to buy off their infinite soul with finite material perks.
The text points out the dark, inevitable conclusion of this materialistic trap. If a society denies the spiritual dimension of humanity, how does the zookeeper maintain order when the humans inevitably realize they are trapped and try to escape the enclosure?
They have to use force.
Yes. The text states plainly that they will have to be forced to stay inside the fence with bayonets. Without the internal, unifying cohesion of Dharma, an institution or a government must resort to external force, mass surveillance, and oppression to maintain the material order. The surrogate police force becomes a literal police force.
So the question becomes, how do we dismantle the zoo? How do we construct a society that honors both wings of the bird, the material reality of the mud, and the spiritual reality of the moon?
This is where the practical economic application of Prout, progressive utilization theory, comes to the forefront. Prout argues that before you can focus on spiritual elevation, socioeconomic disparity must be aggressively and systemically eradicated. You cannot preach to a starving person about the infinite cosmos. You must solve the reality of their physical suffering first.
The mud has to be manageable before you can look at the lily.
Exactly. Prout emphasizes not just the redistribution of existing wealth, but the massive progressive increase of collective wealth through localized economic planning. The text provides a historical and economic example regarding the state of Orissa in India. It notes that Orissa possesses abundant natural mineral wealth, coal, bauxite, manganese, as well as massive agricultural potential. Yet, due to poor economic management, centralization, and outside exploitation, the local population suffered in grinding poverty.
The raw materials were being extracted and exported, and the local people who lived on the land saw absolutely none of the economic benefit.
Prout's solution is logical, decentralized block-level planning. It advocates for developing local irrigation systems so that agriculture is not entirely at the mercy of unpredictable monsoons. It demands that raw materials be kept local to build industries and manufacturing plants within the state, thereby dramatically raising the purchasing power and living standards of the local population. It is a highly practical material upliftment.
But the crucial distinction is that this material upliftment is intentionally paired with the cultivation of genuine human unity.
Yes, through what the text calls the psycho-sentimental and spiritual-sentimental spheres. The text observes that humanity wastes an enormous amount of energy fighting over superficial physical differences. Language, manner of dress, food habits, these are merely geographical and environmental byproducts. Instead, society must focus on universal points of unity. We must cultivate a shared cultural history and ultimately rest on the absolute cosmic sentiment that we all originate from the same infinite source. We are one human family.
We've covered the vast philosophical architecture. We've examined the universe, the zoo, the biological parasites, and the lily. But we need to ground this in practical reality. How do we apply this? I don't want to be trapped in a gilded zoo, and I certainly don't want my brain hijacked by a viral meme. I want to cultivate that expanded mind. How do I actually achieve this on a random Tuesday while dealing with traffic, emails, and the 10-headed demon of distraction?
The texts are remarkably pragmatic, offering specific daily habits designed to build this inward expansion and forge that pinnacled intellect. Habit number 1, you must ruthlessly cut what the text terms psychic extravaganza.
Psychic extravaganza. It sounds almost theatrical, but the reality of it is exhausting. What exactly does it entail?
Consider the sheer volume of your waking cognitive life that is completely wasted on petty, draining mental loops. It is the imaginary arguments you rehearse with your boss while standing in the shower. It is holding on to a burning grudge because someone cut you off in traffic 3 days ago. It is replaying an embarrassing moment from a decade ago. It is the default mode network of the brain running wild.
You are taking the exact same vital cognitive energy that could be utilized to experience profound cosmic expansion, and you are squandering it on absolute trivialities.
It is a terrible return on investment. The habit requires you to become a ruthless, vigilant guard at the door of your own mind. When a petty, extravagant thought arises, you must actively and consciously dismiss it. You must recognize it and say, no, this yields no return. I am not spending my limited cognitive energy here.
But relying purely on willpower to banish annoying thoughts is incredibly difficult. When I'm stressed, willpower is usually the first thing to collapse.
Which brings us to habit number 2, which is a physiological hack designed to bypass the failure of cognitive willpower. Intentional respiration.
Linking the physical breath to the cognitive thought.
There is a deeply hardwired biological connection between the rhythm of your respiration and the state of your central nervous system. When you are caught in psychic extravaganza, when you are angry, stressed, or doom scrolling, your breathing naturally becomes shallow, erratic, and confined to your upper chest. You are in a physical state of sympathetic nervous system arousal, contraction.
You are bracing for impact.
Conversely, when you are pondering profound, subtle, peaceful thoughts, your breathing naturally slows down and deepens into the diaphragm. They mirror each other. The habit is to reverse engineer this biological mirror. By taking conscious control of your physical respiration, forcing yourself to breathe deeply into the diaphragm, you stimulate the vagus nerve.
The vagus nerve acts as the braking system for the body's stress response.
Precisely. Stimulating the vagus nerve increases vagal tone and physically forces your parasympathetic nervous system into a state of calm. This physical shift drags the mind out of its frantic, contracted state and into a state of subtle focus. You are using the physiological mechanics of the body to tame the psychological state of the mind.
It is an incredibly powerful tool. What is habit number 3?
Habit number 3 is upavasa, or the practice of fasting. It is crucial to understand that in this context, fasting is not about ascetic punishment, and it has nothing to do with modern diet culture. It is fundamentally about energy economics.
How does the economics of energy relate to digestion?
The physical process of digestion consumes an immense amount of the body's physiological and mental energy. Breaking down complex foods is hard work. By periodically abstaining from food, often aligned with specific lunar cycles as outlined in the texts, which impact the body's fluid dynamics, you give your entire biological system a rest. You consciously step off the relentless daily treadmill of material consumption.
You stop processing the physical mud for a day.
And you redirect all of that freed up vital energy entirely toward your psychological and spiritual elevation. It promotes cellular autophagy, yes, but mentally it breaks the slow, natural drift downward into staticity and lethargy. It is a vigorous periodic reset of your entire operating system.
I want to examine the balance of all this. If I am constantly guarding my mind against trivial thoughts, consciously controlling my breath, and periodically fasting, aren't I in danger of tuning myself too tightly? Don't I just become a different, perhaps more rigid kind of fanatic?
The texts anticipate that exact danger perfectly. They demand what is called the integral outlook. To explain the mechanics of this outlook, the text uses the analogy of a stringed instrument, like a guitar or a sitar.
How does the string tension relate to the psychological state?
If you tune the string of the instrument too loosely, what happens? You pluck it, and it makes a dull, flat, lifeless thud. It creates no music, no resonance. That loose string represents the crude materialist living in the zoo enclosure, solely focused on physical pleasures, consumption, and accumulation.
They are vibrating at the acoustic root of ta, pure wet cement.
But if you tune the string too tightly, the moment you pluck it, the tension is too great. It snaps violently, and the instrument is ruined. The texts refer to these overly tight individuals as Mayavadians, the proponents of the doctrine of illusion. These are the escapists who tune themselves so tightly to the spiritual that they declare the physical world is fake. They ignore their duties, they ignore systemic suffering, and they sever their connection to humanity.
So the objective is finding the correct tension.
The perfect tension. The middle path. You must be tuned tightly enough to resonate with the infinite, but loose enough to operate effectively in the real world. You must be the lily. You do not worship the mud, but you recognize that the mud is a real, valid manifestation of the supreme. You fight for justice, you love your family, you build infrastructure in society. Not out of selfish, contracted attachment, but because you see the divine shining through the material world.
It is about maintaining that resonance in everything you do.
And when you achieve that perfect tension, true expansion occurs. The text uses a final analogy, comparing the expanded mind to a cloud. An unexpanded, ego-driven mind is like a tiny, isolated wisp of a cloud. But through the application of these practices, the respiration, the focus, the socioeconomic engagement, that cloud grows. It spreads across the horizon, embracing the mountains, the valleys, the cities. You cease to feel isolated. When you look at a stranger or a forest, you do not see another to be exploited. You see a reflection of your own infinite consciousness. You achieve a universal brotherhood that makes exploiting others or the planet literally impossible, because to do so would be akin to your right hand attacking your left hand.
That profound image brings us to the synthesis of everything we've explored today. When we looked at the entire landscape of this deep dive, the chilling evolutionary warnings about parasitic memes, the rigorous ancient science of tantric expansion, the socioeconomic imperative of Prout, progressive utilization theory, it all points toward a massive, necessary shift in how human civilization must operate if we are going to survive our own staggering technological power.
Humanity must transcend the artificial division between science and spirituality. Material science, aparavidya, has revealed the astonishing complexity of the outer cosmos. It gave us the James Webb Telescope. It allows us to understand the mechanics of the physical universe.
But spiritual science, Parvidya, reveals the profound, infinite depths of the inner cosmos. It teaches us how to conquer the 10-headed demon, how to avoid the mind virus, and how to sit peacefully in the silent room.
They're the two wings of the same bird. A civilization cannot reach its full potential through material knowledge alone. We have seen that extreme materialism leads to the gilded zoo enclosure, environmental degradation, and profound spiritual emptiness. But equally, a civilization cannot rely on a spirituality that is divorced from rational scientific inquiry, because that leads to the $5 radar sign, dogmatic institutional control, and vulnerability to parasitic memes. The future of humanity lies in the synthesis, building a society that is technologically advanced, fiercely analytically grounded, and deeply spiritually awakened.
We need a society that isn't just staring blindly through the incredible lenses of our telescopes, but one that deeply, intimately understands the expansive consciousness of the eye looking through the lens. The sources we examine today strongly advocate that to make this world a better place for all to live with happiness and justice, know more about Neo-Humanism, Prout, progressive utilization theory. Join Prout's study circle and also join our YouTube channel at Vipers Movement at New Human Project. Firm your understanding about scientific spirituality and neo-humanism. Actually, a new ethics for the future humanity. For authenticity of original knowledge regarding this, do visit Ananda Marga Publication and visit ampsbooks@gmail.com.
It's all about making that practical connection.
Absolutely. And we want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over as you step back into the complexities of your day. The philosophies we explored suggest that the supreme entity is not located light years away at the very edge of the observable universe. Rather, it is hidden right behind the thin curtain of your own I-ness. So today, the next time you find yourself saying, I am hungry, or I am tired, or I am incredibly stressed, pause for just a moment and ask yourself, who exactly is doing the speaking? And perhaps more importantly, who is the silent witness doing the listening?